20 years ago, a little game called RuneScape charmed a generation of gamers. But the game we remember has changed. Gambling mechanics, aggressive monetization, battle passes, pay to win, cosmetics, all of it. The RuneScape I remember was a chicken punching simulator. It was about running around the wilderness with your friends, then bragging about it at school the next day. It was a game filled with adventure, and quests, and dragons, and woodcutting. So much freaking woodcutting. So, pardon my language, but what the Falador happened? I think the trouble actually started way earlier than most of us realize. A single moment, a diabolical decision made by the game's creators that set off a chain reaction. But to understand what it was and why they made that decision, we need to know who they were. How these three brothers made a game that changed the world, and how it all went to hell in a handbasket. So bust out the tea and crumpets, friends, because we're going to England. Say hello to Andrew, Paul, and Ian. Three brothers, 80s kids that grew up playing games like Dungeons & Dragons, Sorcerer's Cave, and The Secret of Monkey Island. Nerdy kids from a nerdy family destined to change the world of gaming forever. And I use the word family deliberately here. Not only did each of the brothers play a part, but their parents helped out too.
So I said I'd have a go, so I did 4 animals for him. I had a camel, a bear, a spider, and a bat. And they're all still on Classic.
So thanks for the arachnophobia, Mrs. Gower. Your animals traumatized me. But make no mistake, it wasn't just cute critters and board games that inspired the original RuneScape. And that's because when Andrew, the middle child, went off to university to study programming, he also fell in love with a different type of game, multi-user dungeons, also known as MUDs. Most of these early MUDs didn't have graphics. They were text-based fantasy adventures. Create a character, explore the world, and slay monsters. Think D&D, but at your computer. But one specific MUD came along that caught Andrew's attention, Ultima Online.
This Britannia is but one of many in the multiverse that is Ultima Online.
Lots of people consider Ultima Online the very first true MMORPG, and it's not hard to see why it took off. This was a game driven by player interaction, and it made Britannia feel like a real place. Not only could you trade and chat with other people, but you could also drag a bunch of demons to town to watch them feast on your sinful neighbors. Huh, just like my childhood in Texas. The point is, MUDs like these were a big aha moment for Andrew. And keep in mind, he'd been coding since the age of 7. But now, with university behind him, he was ready to try his hand at making one for himself. That's how Devious Mud came to be, the precursor to the original RuneScape. And the real kicker was that he wrote the whole thing in a hip new programming language that was taking over the world, Java.
The last thing Bernard saw was not the depths of the blue sea, but the blue screen of death.
Very violent eulogy, I like it.
And if you're on the other side of the screen wondering, Clyde, why does it matter how the game was made? I don't care who caught the lobbies for the fish pie, I just care that it was delicious. That was a terrible analogy, but you get the picture. But trust me, in this case, how RuneScape was made was actually very important to its success. And that's because most computer games run on the hardware that they're installed on. They're limited by the strength of the rig that's playing it. Don't have a swanky graphics card lying around? Well, too bad, so sad, good luck trying to get a modern game to look the other way. No fancy dancing night elf parties in World of Warcraft for you! But RuneScape was different. It was a Java applet that ran in your web browser. That meant the game could be played on a ton of different systems. No waiting for downloads or installing a game to your hard drive. Heck, that's what Jagex originally stood for, Java Gaming Experts. It wasn't even a proper company at first, just a brand name they published the game under. Likewise, because the game was running off a server somewhere, it meant that your progress was saved no matter where you played from. You could conceivably PK your friends from the school computer lab, go to class with them, run home, and wait for them to log on so you could send their butts straight back to Lumbridge all over again.
Are we the baddies?
Actually, that's an important point we need to talk about. No, not the PKing stuff, the bit about the school computer labs. Hear me out. Where were you the very first time you played RuneScape? Keep in mind, the game originally came out in 2001. Loads of families didn't have a computer at home, and chances are good that even if you did, you probably heard about RuneScape from one of your friends. I know I did, and I went to school and told all my buddies about it, which then meant that in any class with computers, you could be 100% certain that we were not doing the assignment and were instead logging into RuneScape. At least that was until the IT department caught on and blocked the website. So we had to get creative. Had to learn what proxies were. Go to some very sketchy websites if you know what I'm saying. Now that I think about it, shortly thereafter the school got hit with a ransomware attack for like $1 million. Probably unrelated. The point is we got to play RuneScape at school and it was the best. And keep in mind, the Gower brothers were making this game from their parents' house. They weren't working with big publishers or getting bankrolled by Silicon Valley. They didn't have a marketing budget. RuneScape was the definition of indie, and it spread by word of mouth between friends. Andrew had coded the whole thing from scratch. Paul was in the living room writing quests, and their brother Ian designed the logo and helped out with the graphics. And I think that's part of what made RuneScape special. Every pixel was handcrafted by these dudes and their parents, even those freaky deaky animals. Point of comparison, you know what my dad would have said to me if I'd asked him to draw spiders for my video game?
Get a job. Oh, get a job? Yeah. Just get a job? Why don't I strap on my job helmet and squeeze down into a job cannon and fire off into Jobland, where jobs grow on jobbies?
Also, super quick, if you want to win some RuneScape stuff, we are doing a giveaway. We've got a couple party hats, we've got some magnet sets, I've got some keychains, there's a classic RuneScape 2 strategy guide that is filled with nostalgia, and I also made some very punny custom RuneScape postcards, and shout out to the guy at Walgreens that helped me print them. You're the best. All you've got to do for a chance to win is leave a comment on this video about RuneScape. Could be a memory, your favorite city, a quest you liked, anything as long as it's about the game. Comments like, "Nice mustache, daddy," while greatly appreciated, do not qualify as they do not contain a RuneScape reference. So leave a comment about RuneScape, and on Wednesday, June 11th, we'll hop in a live stream and pick winners using a random comment picker. I did one of these giveaways last year with a bunch of Nintendo stuff, and it was a lot of fun. I think we ended up mailing prizes to like 7 different countries. The point is, I'll bring the prizes, you bring the nostalgia, it'll be a good time. At the end of the day, these giveaways are just my way of saying thank you for watching my dorky videos, and for sharing your memories and adventures and all the kind words and support. Anyway, full contest rules are in the description, blah blah blah. Yeah. Cue the montage. So we've talked a little bit about what inspired RuneScape, and how it being a Java applet really helped the game go viral. But super quick, I want to underscore just how fast the game took off. A week after the game launched, they reported having 50,000 registered accounts. 6 months later, that number was 300,000. And a year later, that number had eclipsed 1 million. And we're going to talk about the stress this put on the Gower brothers here in a minute, and particularly when RuneScape 2 came around. But for now, I want us to ask ourselves an important question, and that's just, what was it about RuneScape that made it so special? How on earth did it manage to get middle school me so jazzed about cutting down virtual trees that I ran home from school to play it? Keep in mind, I was a geeky teenager and I only had 2 passions in life: video games and Smallville on the CW. And I'll let you guess which one warped my brain more. Likewise, that was just my childhood. I bet if you asked 10 different people what they liked about RuneScape, you'd get 10 different answers. Like this Reddit thread. What made old school RuneScape so special, huh? The quests are great. The music, of course. The grind, baby. Don't I know it? Also, shout out to this guy who just replied, "Why do I like RuneScape? Stockholm Syndrome." And I think those are all valid reasons. Well, except maybe that last one. But seriously, when I think of RuneScape, I think about the community. The people that filled up Falador, then Varrock, and Karamja. And the scams. Good grief, so many scams. Do y'all remember just how many scams there were floating around in RuneScape? From armor trimming services to money doublers and trust tests, I was constantly having to stop my friends from getting scammed. Don't do this, man, he's not gonna trim your armor. I'm telling you, it's a scam. Bro, it's a scam.
If I were to do this, if I even could do it, I'd need a guarantee. How do I know you can deliver?
You don't. But I can.
All this stuff was part of the community's culture. Spamming rainbow text and duels and just hanging out in the mining guild because it was the place to be. Everyone that played RuneScape back in the day remembers the chaos that was drop parties. Conga lines formed that snaked through the entire city. And don't even get me started on wanna buy girlfriend memes.
Napoleon, don't be jealous that I've been chatting online with babes all day.
This is just what RuneScape was like in the 2000s. It was messy and clunky, and most of us had no idea what we were doing. The quests were simple: help a chef or recover a stolen shield. One of my personal favorites involved saving this dude from living the rest of his days as a chicken. The writing was strange, but oddly charming. Much of it penned by Andrew's brother Paul, who had a big hand in shaping a lot of this early content.
They got lots of imagination. They were always playing imaginary games, acting out things.
There was a very early fantasy game I played probably when I was about 5, but that was an early fantasy game called Sorcerer's Cave, which is a game where you lay out big tiles on the floor and you basically get to explore a dungeon as a character, and probably give me a little bit of influence on what I do even then, you know.
This is what a happy childhood looks like, and it's not surprising to me that all the charm and care they grew up with made its way into their world. RuneScape wasn't World of Warcraft. It wasn't padded with hundreds of quests to go kill 15 wolves over and over again. If they gave you a paragraph of text to read, it was worth it to actually read it. And more often than not, players would find themselves laughing at how ridiculous the writing was. Speaking of the players, I can still remember the first time I saw somebody running around in a set of black armor with a rune two-hander sword. And I was like, dang dude, you look freaking cool. And he was like, yeah bro, I'm pure. What's pure? Pure strength, bro, pure strength. All of this was part of RuneScape's culture, even the language we used. Daring adventures, life or death duels, PKing in the wildy with our clans. Not guilds, clans. By day, we were all watching Sailor Moon on Toonami, and by night, we were playing RuneScape. And the real masochists among us were leveling up their prayer skill by burying thousands of chicken bones. And look, by this point, I think you and we've gotten pretty close. But I think it's time we take this relationship to the next level. I'm ready to be honest about my past as a skiller. If you haven't heard this term before, just imagine a character that avoided leveling combat skills at all costs. No attack, defense, magic, any of that jazz. And instead focused on more peaceful skills, like mining and smithing and woodcutting, all that stuff. These characters were kind of like a challenge mode for the game, because it made many of the quests ridiculously hard to do. One I vividly remember was using Rings of Recoil and eating lots of food in order to beat a high-level monster for the Lost City quest. Good times. But to make a long story short, my character's name was Trick Track, based on a song from the Phantasy Star Online soundtrack. Anyway, my character specialized in woodcutting, and I ran around with a clan called Peaceful back in the day, which, despite all odds, our old forum is still online and accessible after all these years. Y'all, I can't tell you how much of a trip it is, logging into modern RuneScape, pulling up my old character, seeing my stuff and levels and a friends list that's longer than my one on Facebook. For me, seeing this stuff is like being at the bottom of a well of nostalgia. I'm craning my head, looking up at a single speck of light, but it's so far away and I can't remember how I got here. It's oddly lonely. Then I wish my friends were here, but they're not, and it feels kind of wrong. And all this talk about online friends brings me to a very particular story I'd like to share about a player I met that went by the handle Jeebus261. So, like I said, I did a lot of woodcutting on Trick Track. It was the only skill I actually reached 99 on. And let's just say, when you spend that many weeks cutting willow trees in Draenor Village, you start to see some familiar faces. One of those faces was Jeebus261, a very friendly, high-level player that was also hanging around leveling up his woodcutting. And because he was online doing the same thing, we naturally bumped into each other a lot. I often found him helping noobs with quests or answering simple questions in chat. Eventually, we struck up a conversation and became friends. In the weeks that we spent mindlessly cutting wood, we'd also talk about our hobbies, life, other aspects of the game, things like that. Which is why when I finally got to the end of level 98, less than 1,000 experience points away from 99, I decided that I wanted him to be there when I leveled up. We'd spent so much time on the grind together, so why not do that last step together too? So I waited and waited, and after several days he finally logged on, and I messaged him and we met up. I whacked a tree and the little fireworks thing happened and it was great. But the number going up wasn't what made that moment special. It was the fact that I had a friend there with me, even if we had a literal ocean between the two of us on the outside world. In RuneScape, we were just two bros that liked to woodcut. No trash talking, no headshots, just two people watching hours fall off the clock. I didn't play a whole lot of the game after that. High school was upon me, and before I knew it, years had flown by. In fact, so much time had passed since I last played RuneScape that when I signed into my account, Jagex told me that my character name had expired and that I had to pick a new one. So Trick Track became Le Trick. Huzzah, I hate it. But if I could just be selfish for a second, I just want to say, Jeebus261, if you're out there, thank you. Thank you for being a friend. Thanks for being a kind soul all those years ago. It meant so much to me that I remembered your name 20 years later. And I think connections like the one we had really speak to the kind of game that RuneScape was. Sure, it was clunky and repetitive, but it was also a big sandbox where people could just hang out. It wasn't always just loud dramatic battles or world-ending stakes. There were quiet moments baked in there too, and it made the game a very different experience from anything else around. It was special, and I have to believe that my story is just one of many, of people that made friends through the game, or joined clans, or ran around the cities and just enjoyed the world. This is all to say that RuneScape was a great game with some warts. But somehow, despite how good we already had it, in the lead up to March of 2004, it was about to get even more awesome. And that's because RuneScape 2 was coming. Okay, so let's take the temperature in the room. By the mid-2000s, the online gaming landscape had changed. Sites like Newgrounds and eBaum's World had made tons of games accessible anywhere, and games like MapleStory and Neopets had built massive followings. Also, shout out to everybody who remembers playing Nanaka Crash. It was this wonky bicycle game, and I knew absolutely nothing about its anime or story, but good god, it was addictive. Anyway, the point is the rise of all these other games put a little more pressure on RuneScape's shoulders. There was more and more competition showing up every day, battling it out for gamers' attention. But Andrew had a secret weapon up his sleeve, a massive overhaul to RuneScape that he'd been working on since 2002. The update promised full 3D rendering, a reworked UI, and a totally new game engine from scratch. The team at Jagex announced the update in July of 2003, calling it RuneScape 2, and the community promptly lost their minds. And let's just remind ourselves, these were pretty big graphical changes. We were going from blobs like these to fully rendered 3D models. I remember growing up that graphics used to be one of the biggest selling points for new consoles and new games. Today though, it's kind of a different story. We're a little desensitized to these very nuanced changes. Unless of course we're talking about puddles in a Spider-Man game, in which case burn the studio to the ground. But going from RuneScape to RuneScape 2 was a big jump. It was a massive rewrite of their entire engine, and I'm not surprised to put a ton of stress on Andrew and the team to meet the growing player expectations. Just listen to how manic the dude sounds about it freaking 15 years later.
We were developing the game so fast and adding features to it every single week, and I was always desperately worried I was going to introduce some horribly critical bugs that were going to take the servers offline, or that we wouldn't have enough capacity to cope because the players were going up so fast, and I was continually trying to up, the number of players was far higher than we originally anticipated, and the servers couldn't actually handle that many players, and I was sort of trying to re-architect the system on the fly to sort of be able to handle more servers and the servers cross-communicating and just trying to keep the whole thing online and working was pretty stressful.
And for anybody out there wondering why didn't they just hit copy and paste and ship RuneScape 2, it is not that simple. Moving over quests, items, and NPCs from RuneScape Classic to RuneScape 2 wasn't easy. Most mechanics had to be rebalanced to work with the new combat system, which introduced attack speed, weapon types, and timed animations. Keep in mind this was the first time players could actually run in RuneScape. The fundamental pace of the game was changing. And if that wasn't already enough, the game was significantly more CPU intensive with the new graphics, which caused the testing servers to crash pretty regularly due to rendering bugs and memory leaks. And surprise, surprise, Andrew worked himself pretty silly patching the game engine every single day for the first few weeks. As you can imagine, every single one of the changes to the game was scrutinized by players during testing. The game's color palette, walking animations, the camera and lighting system. And it took the Gower Brothers and their team running themselves ragged to get it right. And the incredible thing is, they more or less delivered. Don't get me wrong, the launch of RuneScape 2 wasn't without its problems. Loads of fans spoke up about how they preferred the original game, or the new combat system wasn't quite there yet. But given all the things that were changing, it's pretty impressive just how well it all went. Between the fans talking about the new graphics, new skills, new content, and a ton of media coverage, RuneScape's active player count soared from a couple 100,000 to more than 500,000 by early 2005. Keep in mind, this number put RuneScape among the top 5 browser games in the world, much of it on the back of the game's accessible free player content. Heck, even the bad guys in movies were playing RuneScape 2. But with every line on the graph trending up, it was clear that Andrew and his brothers were at a critical fork in the road. Their hard work had put them on a throne that they had made. But what most of us didn't know at the time was that behind the scenes, that throne was actually catching fire. In the lead up to the new and improved RuneScape, the Gower Brothers had moved their base of operations out of their parents' house and into a proper office. And if you thought you had imposter syndrome, wait till you hear about how Andrew describes the experience.
And I remember the night before sort of frantically Googling sort of like, how do you interview someone? What did you ask at an interview? What are you supposed to do?
My interview was awesome because it was just a room and there was just a table with a laptop on it and Andrew, and that was it.
This might be my favorite interview of his over the years. Not because it's spaghetti, but because it's just a look at a guy that was trying his best to keep the lights on. And in 2005, with more than 500,000 players regularly logging into RuneScape, it was clear they needed more everything. Coders, yeah, but also support teams, server infrastructure, the people that would help make content for their player base with increasing expectations. And all those things cost a lot of money. Likewise, Andrew, Paul, and Ian wore a lot of hats at this point, but the one hat they didn't have between the three of them was being the head of a massive company. Don't misunderstand me. They'd learned an incredible amount in 5 years. They'd launched games and projects, but the size of the spotlight that was being put on them from RuneScape was a lot. It'd be a lot for anyone, which brings us to what I believe is the critical decision that changed RuneScape forever. A desperate decision they made out of a frenzy to scale their company, and that was the choice in October of 2005 to bring in external investors. Keep in mind that up until 2005, the game had been entirely self-funded. It had been a turbulent, meteoric rise for sure, but at least it was them at the helm making decisions for the game. But now, there was a shift happening behind the scenes. This first transaction, 35% stake in the company, was acquired by a group called Insight Venture Partners. And it wasn't just the profit they wanted. And that's because as part of the deal, they also started bringing in their executives to join Jagex's board of directors. And I probably don't need to tell you this, but I'm just going to go ahead and put it out there anyway. Once a company throws open the doors to external funding, they are not easy doors to shut. Those days of sitting around the dinner table, watching mom doodle animals for the game, were long gone. And RuneScape and Jagex had entered a new era. And please, don't misunderstand me. I'm not sitting here trying to convince you that all investors are evil or that the Gower brothers were trying to sell out or get a quick paycheck. I don't think those things are true. No, honestly, I think they were just trying to survive. I think the expectations from players had gotten so big, the game was competing for attention at such a high level that they just felt overwhelmed. And of course, right about that time, they had investors lining up, promising them everything in the kitchen sink, telling them we'll give your company structure and those much needed business skills and connections and resources, and you don't have an HR team? No problem, we'll sort it out. Just sign on the dotted line and we'll figure it out together.
I know some of these words.
And look, Andrew and Paul have been relatively quiet, relatively private about how they felt about these early investors and the effect they had on RuneScape. I respect that, and I don't want to speculate or put words in their mouths. That said, there have been a couple interviews over the years where the mask has slipped, if only for a few seconds. Case in point, here's an excerpt from an interview last year where Andrew was asked about his then upcoming game, Brighter Shores. We're in a very lucky position where there's no external investors. Because I've been able to fund this entirely off my previous success. There's no external investors, no publishers, no one breathing down my neck saying we've got to meet those guidelines. And look, I know this is an interview about his current game and not about RuneScape, but I think it's obvious to anyone paying a little bit of attention that there's some snark in there aimed right at Jagex. This was clearly a painful experience for them. And I can't help but wonder just how many other indie game developers out there have had to or will have to make this decision for themselves, to balance what they want, what they think is best for their game and their community, versus the desire to grow quickly. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we're here to talk about RuneScape and Jagex, but humor me for a moment. Think about any indie game darling that you've enjoyed over the last 10 years. Can you imagine just how many offers Concerned Ape has had to sell Stardew Valley? Just how many dollar signs bigger studios have dangled in front of him to sell off chunks of his company? But clearly the dude has said no to all that. He's like, I'm not going to charge for updates. I'm not going to nickel and dime my players. I'm going to make a game that I'm proud of. And if me and my two buddies have to spend the next 10 freaking years making it, then it'll be good when it comes out. This dude is clearly there for his fans and not the money. If you don't believe me, go watch his interview with Bobby Lee and look at how much he geeked out just walking around his farm. It's positively adorable. This is the giddy face of a developer that cares about his players and their experiences. But for every Concerned Ape, there's got to be a dozen or more creators that give into that temptation, that see the opportunity to scale, the chance to make it big, and they make a different decision. Everyone from Notch and Minecraft to That Game Company and the team behind Journey. These are all choices that creators get to navigate themselves. Some of them become incredibly wealthy off the backs of these investments, and I can't blame them. And full disclosure, these deals don't always turn out bad. Supergiant Games, the folks behind Bastion and Hades, they took on external funding during the development of Transistor, and it clearly didn't compromise their identity as a studio. But unfortunately, when it comes to RuneScape and how it changed with investors, let's just say it didn't swing that way. And that's because from the moment they got their foot in the door, the game started changing in ways that were very much at odds with how the game had been up to that point. It's time to talk about everybody's favorite thing, monetizing players. In the months and years that followed Inside Venture partners entering Jagex, the company grew dramatically. Public records show they had less than 30 employees in December of 2003, but just 2 years later, that number was 10 times higher, over 300. By 2007, that number had climbed again to 400. And if that wasn't enough culture shock for him, that same year the company's original CEO, Constant Tedder, was replaced by a guy named Jeff Edison. And if you're sitting there going, well, wait a minute, Clyde, maybe a new CEO's a good thing, huh? Maybe that Jeff Edison guy was a gamer. All I can say to that is Edison's literal goal at Jagex was to accelerate international growth, and previously he'd been an executive CEO at PayPal. Well, doesn't that just scream caring about gamers, right? Guys, let's just try a couple microtransactions. I bet the players will love it.
No. No.
Also, while doing research for this episode, I came across a really funny meme that a RuneScape player put together about Edison, and it's this one. It's so badass when men stand in front of stuff they've destroyed. Iron Man, explosion. John Wick, dumpster fire. The Joker, random hospital. Jeff Edison, RuneScape. So yeah, Jagex had grown. It had become a proper company, no longer just a brand or a logo. It now had processes and structure and KPIs and quarterly objectives. And with these new members of the team came new ideas, some great and others not. I'm not going to go through all of them here because many of us lived through this history, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, here's a few changes to RuneScape that did not go over well with the community. For example, removing the wilderness and free trade between players, adding player bonds, effectively signing off on real-world trading for in-game currency, creating daily login bonuses in the form of the Squeal of Fortune, which could also be purchased with real-world money, implementing the Treasure Hunter minigame, which also had perks that could be purchased with real-world money, adding keys and rune coins and other virtual currencies to make purchases even more opaque, launching the Hero Pass system, which offered literal experience buffs and gameplay advantages that could be bought with, you guessed it, real-world money. And please understand, this is just a small sample of the various monetization that entered RuneScape after investors joined. A greatest hits version, if you will. But regardless, a lot of players interpreted all these changes as one big message from the new Jagex. We're cool with you paying to win as long as you're paying us. And what's really frustrating is that at the time, a lot of these changes came under the guise of tackling real-world transactions and botting problems. But let's be real here. It's pretty weird that a lot of these solutions came in the form of charging players money. Like what? How do half of these things solve your bot problems? And look, I'm not going to sit here and act like I have a total and complete understanding of the scale of botting in RuneScape. There are in fact literal news stories floating around talking about how the game is part of Venezuela's economy. Clearly the situation is wild and complicated and way above my pay grade. But my point is, if we mapped out a timeline of every change to the game involving monetization, you'd see two things right away. Number one, all of these changes came after investors had joined the company, some of them pretty shortly thereafter. Likewise, again, I have to stress, up until 2005, RuneScape had absolutely no microtransactions at all. Yeah, it had a monthly membership option that offered more content, but that was a very reasonable monthly fee of $5 a month, and the Gower Brothers prided themselves on keeping that number low. And the second thing about this chart that we've got to acknowledge, and by far more heartbreaking, is that the lion's share of this aggressive monetization came after Paul and Andrew had left the company. They had watched the company change in front of their very eyes, getting outvoted in board meetings, seeing money-hungry executives sitting across the table, and they knew they were powerless to stop it. The door they had opened in 2005 couldn't be shut, no matter how much they wanted to, no matter how much they wished they could take it back. Just listen to how Paul puts it, and tell me you can't hear the frustration in this guy's voice.
I think I actually left the company when they started introducing microtransactions to the Squeal of Fortune, because one thing which we'd always publicly said to the players was that we wouldn't start selling microtransactions. So by them doing that, if I was still involved in the company, it sort of felt like it made me into a liar. I was sort of saying we'd never do that, and then we did.
This is a guy that when he saw the writing on the wall, he decided to walk away from the company and the world that he and his family had built with their bare hands. He didn't leave because he wanted to, but because he wouldn't allow Jagex to make him a liar, to compromise his vision to keep RuneScape good for the players. This is a good dude, and I can't help but wonder what RuneScape would look like today if things had been different. If the Gowers had found a way to grow the company, but also keep their hands on the reins. But by this point, I think we both know that's not how this story goes. And that's because in December of 2010, Andrew and Paul quietly left Jagex's board of directors. No announcement from the company, no post, no celebration, nada. The guys that had poured their lives into making the game, to writing and coding so much of its content, were gone, and they didn't even get a goodbye. The stories of everything they'd gone through, the late nights, and putting out fires, moments with fans, I find this honestly kind of upsetting. Not just because they deserve those flowers, but because fans deserve the chance to tell them what the game had meant to them. You know how many lives RuneScape changed? How many friendships and weddings it led to? It inspired an entire generation of gamers, myself included. I can't get those weekends I spent cutting wood back, but I wouldn't want them back even if I could. Those are memories I have of my friends, and RuneScape was our playground. And after the Gower brothers left, everybody knew that Jagex was never going to be the same. But as strange as this is going to sound, what happened next might actually surprise you. So one of the funny things that happened after Andrew and Paul left the company was that all those vultures that had swooped in to claim pieces of the pie, they kind of all fought each other, like constantly. Look, if we tried to map out every time RuneScape has been bought and sold since the Gower brothers left, it'd be a lot. And I'm talking a lot. Case in point, in the years that followed Inside Venture Partners acquiring stake in Jagex, they were also joined by two other investment groups, Rain and Spectrum Equity. But that was all then picked up by a company called Hong Tao, a separate Chinese investment company that worked under the name Fukong Interactive. And if that wasn't enough hands fighting over the scraps, in 2020, US-based firm MacArthur Fortune acquired Jagex, which was then shortly thereafter sold to the Carlyle Group, who had acquired a majority stake at the company. Still following? Great, because then last year they were purchased by a company called CVC Capital Partners, and then again by Haveli Investments in another separate deal. That's like, what, 10 different owners in 10 years? What do you think? Does that sound like a happy business to you? Honestly, I think it's kind of funny that after all these years, after all these executives desperately trying to make modern RuneScape as profitable as possible, that so many players have returned to the classic game. I think that says a lot about where modern RuneScape is at. But hey, that's just me, and I promise no shade at all if you enjoy retail or its current offerings. I am not judging you. The point is, this game that was originally made for fun by a family has become a portfolio piece for investment companies. The community still cares, at least a lot of folks do, and that's amazing. But I can't help but wonder if anyone at Jagex still cares. I'd say flip a coin, but in this case, spin the squeal feels more appropriate. Your guess is as good as mine. Before we get out of here, I want to ask you to consider one last question as part of this conversation, and it's this. What would you do if you were in their shoes? Every developer, every creator, every artist gets to make this decision for themselves. How much they're willing to compromise their vision for a paycheck or for connections or resources. And I think my personal takeaway from this story is that if you see an indie game or a new creator and you like what they're making, what they're putting out in the world, tell them, freaking support them. If we don't hand over $15 to people like Concerned Ape, I promise there are studios out there that will scoop them up and they'll be happy to charge us $60 or more. In a lot of ways, what's happened here with the Gower brothers is a cautionary tale for the industry. What we create will survive us. We can't change that. The internet is forever. But when the people we care about leave, when companies prioritize profits over player experiences, we're reminded as to why so many of these companies are just not your friend. Alright, so a big freaking thank you to our YouTube members and our Patreon subscribers. Your support really does keep this channel going. Thank you a million times, thank you. Likewise, don't forget to leave a comment of your favorite RuneScape memory or a quest or a location you like to enter the giveaway. The live stream will be on the channel on June 11th, and I am terrible at live streams, so come on down, win some prizes, and laugh at me. Also, I would not forgive myself if I didn't take the chance to say thank you to Andrew, Paul, and Ian, and everybody at Jagex that made RuneScape an amazing game. It's not an exaggeration to say that your game changed my life, gave me friends that I wouldn't have to this day otherwise. So from the bottom of my heart, I just want to say thank you for making your chicken punchy MMO. I freaking loved it. Appreciate the time, y'all. Thanks for watching this episode. Like and subscribe, blah, 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 all that jazz. See y'all next time. Bye!